I used to work at a bar 2 miles away from my house. One night, after my shift ended around 11 p.m., I decided to stay for a couple of drinks before heading home. It had been a great night in terms of tips, leaving me with almost $400 in cash. The road between the bar and my house had minimal lighting, with just one streetlight located about a quarter mile from the bar. It was very dark that night. The moon was almost invisible and very cloudy, so it was almost pitch black. Not long after I left the bar, a car slowly passed me, and about a quarter of a mile down the road it slowed to a stop and just parked there. I stopped walking and watched the car as it stayed there for a few minutes, then slowly drove away. A couple of minutes later, the same car came back slowly, driving by in the opposite lane. It drove past me and went further down the road, then slowed to a stop again. The car then did a U-turn and started coming back down the road towards me with its lights off. I didn't have a cell phone and there was no one around to see what was going on. The car was between me and the bar, so I couldn't get back to safety there. And my house was still over 1.5 miles away, meaning there was no way I could escape. I quickly ran off the road into the woods and ducked down behind a bush. I watched for the car, but it was too dark to see it with the lights off. Plus, bushes and trees were blocking my view. I remained crouched for about 10 minutes, but didn't see or hear anything, so I thought it was safe to leave. As I was about to make my way back to the road, I heard car doors closing. I was terrified. It felt like my chest was about to explode. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up straight, and I kept imagining someone sneaking up behind me. I stayed hidden and hoped that whoever it was wouldn't find me. I don't know how long I stayed there, but I eventually heard car doors slamming shut again, then cars passing by. I gave it a couple of minutes, then made my way back to the road. Convinced the path was clear, I sprinted back to the bar to let my boss know what had happened. He insisted that I never walk home alone at night again. Either him or his brother would give me a ride home. It was about 9 p.m. and already dark. I'd been out with friends but had to get up early the next day, so I decided to go home before it was too late. I turned onto my road and noticed a guy standing on the other side, watching me. I just pretended not to notice and kept walking. Surprisingly, he began walking next to me, matching my pace. In an attempt to create some distance, I slowed down, expecting him to do the same. But he matched my pace once again. I was still about a 10-minute walk from my house, and there was no one else except for me and this creepy guy. I watched as he walked abruptly down a driveway and vanished behind a tall house. The trees formed a canopy over the narrow driveway, obscuring him within seconds. I kept walking but stayed alert, constantly checking my surroundings to make sure he wouldn't reappear. There was no sign of him, and after what felt like forever, I was almost at my house. I crossed to the opposite side of the road when I was 2 houses away from mine and took the key out of my pocket. Almost immediately, I got the feeling that someone was behind me, so I turned around. There he was. He had appeared out of nowhere and was only a few feet behind me. I ran down my driveway and up the steps to the front door. I looked back as I nervously searched for the right key and saw him continue walking down the sidewalk staring at me. Just as I moved to put the key in the lock, he ran toward me from across the neighbor's driveway. He was inches away when I opened the door, ran in, and slammed it shut, causing him to crash into it. He tried turning the handle, but luckily we had a Yale lock, so it had already locked itself. He started brutally punching and kicking the door. It was an old house with an old wooden door that had glass panels, and I was afraid it would break under his attack. I ran up the stairs to my room so I could add another closed door between him and me. My roommate already had the door open when I got there since she could hear all the commotion. She called the police right away. After about 5 minutes, the guy seemed to give up, and the banging stopped. The police eventually arrived, interviewed me, and then drove around to see if they could find him, but they never did. When the police explained the situation, it was clear that he had believed that I was pretending to be at home in order to mislead him. Once he saw that it wasn't a trick, he made a rapid and forceful effort to grab me. I was walking from my girlfriend's house around 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. I used to do this quite often due to my financial problems. The path I walked was dark and scary, so I usually wore my headphones and ran until I reached the main road, which was well lit. This usually took me about 10 minutes to complete. As I was walking, I noticed a guy approaching me in my direction. At that moment, my girlfriend called asking if I had gotten home safely and if everything was okay. The closer I got to him, the more uncomfortable I began to feel. Something just felt off about this guy. I walked past him, but I noticed he was looking at me from head to toe the entire time. I assumed he had been drinking from the nearby bars. I tried to shake off the nervousness and continued my walk. However, when I looked back, I realized that he had slowed down and was now following me. My heart raced, knowing I had another 10 minutes before I got home. When I looked back again, my fears were confirmed. He had turned around and was walking in my direction. Without hesitation, I ran as fast as I could, jumping over a fence into a supermarket parking lot. I didn't stop running until I finally got home. Thinking about that night still gives me chills. I was 20 and about 6 months pregnant walking home from work. My usual route involved cutting through a spacious, well-lit parking lot behind the church to reach the side entrance of my complex. As I walked, I couldn't help but notice a small four-door car with intensely dark tinted windows slowly making its way across the wide stretch of the parking lot. It passed by me and then came around the other end and passed me once more. An uneasy feeling washed over me as the car did another U-turn at the opposite end of the parking lot, heading toward me once again. At that moment, I knew I was in grave danger. Despite the temptation to keep walking straight home, knowing that my husband and his brother would be there to confront whoever was following me, a different thought crossed my mind. What if they just want to see where I lived? Considering the uncertainty and not wanting to risk any harm, I pretended I was going to turn right, which caused the car following me to pass. Shortly after, the car turned at the next traffic light half a block ahead. As soon as the car was out of sight, I ran across the street, sought shelter in the parking lot adjacent to the entrance of my apartment complex. Hiding behind a parked car, I watched anxiously as the car that had been following me slowly passed through the parking lot entrance. Once it was gone, I came out of my hiding spot and ran back to my apartment. The experience left me in shock for several days afterwards, and although I never encountered that car again, the haunting memory of that night still terrifies me. Back in 1992, I was walking through the city park late at night. It was 1 o'clock a.m., and the park was practically empty. Normally, I would have had my headphones on, but unfortunately the batteries had died that night. Since MP3 players were not yet common, relying on batteries was the norm. I was walking when I suddenly heard a voice across the duck pond shouting, "Hey man, I like your shorts." Looking out of the corner of my eye, I saw two guys sitting on swings at the other end of the pond, where the cross street met the park. I ignored his comment and kept walking. A few seconds later, he yelled again, "Hey man, I like your shorts." I continued to ignore it, but was now on high alert. As I crossed to the side of the street from my end of the pond, I looked to my left towards the other side of the pond where the guys were on the swing. They had left the swing and were now running down the middle of the street towards me. I took off like a rocket. I had never run so fast in my life. I was about a mile from my house, and I felt like I had broken the world record for the mile that night. I tremble to think what could have happened if those guys had caught me. I'm just glad I made it home safely.